is Holyrood Sources Live. Please welcome Calum Macdonald, Geoff Aberdein and Andy Maciver.
Hello, good evening. Welcome to Lewes Castle in Stornoway for Holyrood Sources Live. We are very pleased to be here with you. This is the first, arguably most important, stop on our Islands tour that we're starting for 2024. We're here in association with SSE, and we are so pleased to be with you on the Isle of Lewis. Our local sponsors, Caledonian McBrain, have paid for some of the drinks tonight, so you can thank them for that. This is the beginning of our tour of Scotland's islands to raise issues, to ask questions, and to, I suppose, try to advance connections between you and local politicians and national politics as well. Just as we get started, and bear in mind that this is an audio thing, so make some noise at the appropriate moment. How many of you have been to a Holyrood Sources Live podcast before? It's an audio thing. I need some applause, some noise. There we go. Good. How many of you listened to the podcast already? Oh, that's strong. How many of you have no idea why you're here, but you're here for the fun of it? Hey, brilliant. Good. You're very welcome. Thank you all so much for being here. And for those of you who are maybe less familiar or need a bit of encouragement to hang in there now the excitement of the election's over, then I can't say it better than Kaz Sterling, who left this review on Apple Podcasts. This is not made up. It says, "Every week I find myself wondering how the podcast will handle the latest events in Scottish politics. It's fearless, incisive, and sometimes humorous." That's definitely made up. That's definitely made up, says Andy. An excellent listen, subscribe now. Feel free to do that. Delivering that fearless, incisive, sometimes humorous analysis week by week on the podcast are Geoff Aberdein, former Chief of Staff to Alex Salmond when he was First Minister. And also Andy Maciver, who was Director of Communications for the Scottish Conservatives. I'll be honest, I was expecting him to be booed, but there we are. Times have changed. We'll talk about that. Tonight with our Islands Tour sponsors, SSE, and in association with our local delivery partners, Caledonian McBrain, we're here to listen, to talk, to converse, and we're going to bring your questions, your concerns, your issues to your newly elected MP, and we'll hear his answers in the next little while as well. First though, Geoff and Andy. Let's just sort of pin down a few things. I think first of all, actually, let's do kind of big national picture. This week is the King's Speech. King's Speech coming up this week. This is arguably where the new Labour government need to start on policy. This is where they need to start presenting bills, what they're going to do. Andy, how significant is this week?
King's Speech is always significant because it's remembered and the governments are held to it for a while afterwards, depending on what they say, and there's always a bit of a tally of how many bills there are. I've already heard that mentioned earlier on today, I think actually 30 bills or something like that. I think it's less significant in some ways this year than it might otherwise be, actually, because I largely think the narrative will still be about the overarching change, certainty, stability that was really the feature of the whole campaign, and will probably continue to be the feature of the King's Speech as well. I still am of the view, there will be policy, obviously there will be some, but I think that it will still take a while longer for there to be a lot of meat on the bones. I'm interested to see what Wes Streeting comes up with from a health point of view. He remains, in my view, clearly the epitome of change, I think, to be honest. You said the word fearless earlier on. I think he's pretty fearless, actually, in terms of what he says about the health service. He says things that a lot of Labour people don't want to say. He says things that a lot of Tories couldn't say.
So he went into the health department, didn't he, and said, the policy of this department is the NHS is broken. Mm-hmm. That's the first thing he said.
And he's right, and people out in the country know that, but it's not an easy thing for a Labour politician to say, and I've been really impressed about the way he's done it, so I'll be interested to look at some of the detail in that tomorrow as well. But I think that Labour will look for overarching message still to be one of calm down everybody, we're in charge now and everything is going to be a bit better than it was. I might be wrong, there might be lots and lots of meat on lots and lots of bones, but I'm still not convinced there will be just quite yet.
And Geoff, there's a question, isn't there, then, about how the Scottish Government can and should react to this week, the King's speech, the bills, the direction of a Labour government?
Yep, and I'm going to come to that in a second, but I'm going to disagree with Andy on something he just said there about this week and the importance of it. I agree where you say that there might not be too much meat on the bone, but I actually would advise the Labour Party to provide some meat on the bone, because this was an election characterised by change. That's what they talked about. The Labour Party talked about change, and they had their 6 big mission-led pillars of their campaign, and some of which we'll get into tonight, no doubt. But they didn't put much detail or meat on the bone, as you put it, Andy. And I think people are looking for detail. They want to understand what change means. And so I do hope that the government take the opportunity to provide us with that much needed detail. I certainly would advise them to. In terms of the Scottish Government reaction to this week and going forward, John Swinney was caught in the hop. There's no doubt about it. He did not want this election 2 months into his first ministership. You can argue that because it came so soon, he can absolve himself of some of the blame for the, let's face it, disastrous result for the SNP on the night. But he wanted time to establish himself. Now, he now has to do that in reaction to 2 weeks on Thursday, and has to provide some of that change that clearly people are looking for. And I don't think continuing as is will stay the course. And I think Kate Forbes is someone I would look at very closely, because she staked her own political career on joining the government as Deputy First Minister and as the Economy Secretary. She needs to now evidence why she took that decision. And she needs to tell the people of Scotland this is going to be different, and this is how it's going to be different.
I think the problem, though, is that the biggest thing that needs to be changed, whether it's by John and Kate or whether it's by Keir and Rachel Reeves, is the economy. I mean, that's what this is all going to be predicated on, and you can't change the economy in 13 days or whatever it's going to be. I'm back from 2 weeks in Spain and Italy, right? And we often, historically in this country, we like to sort of mock places like Spain and Italy as having basket case governments and basket case economies. We don't do that so much anymore, I've noticed. Catalonia last year grew at 2.9%, Scotland grew at 0.1%, Spain grew at, I think, 1.9 or 1.8, and is projected to grow at about that until 2030. Now, that's not great, but it's better than us. It's better than here. We're like 1.4, 1.5 in the UK. And again, for the next few years, under Labour, projected still to be at that. So actually, the biggest change they need to do is a pretty significant structural change to the economy. And we'll ask Torkel when he comes up what things are looking like there. But unless you make that big change, which you can't do in 13 days, a lot of the other things that they might want to discuss actually won't happen.
Yeah, fair. There's lots to get into this evening. There's no doubt about it. Just a bit of why we wanted to be here as well this evening. Apart from anything else, it's important that we do this. We've done a bunch of events since we launched the podcast about 18 months ago, Edinburgh, Aberdein, etc. But clearly, there are concerns in places like this that do not get addressed when you only speak in cities and only hear from politicians in those places. Also, though, Andy, you've got a personal connection here, as do I. My family is from here, which is why it's the most important stop on the island tour. You have a personal connection. Tell us about that.
Well, my father is from here. My dad grew up in Balmerino Drive, just up the road. My grandfather, John Angus Maciver, was head teacher at the primary school. My grandmother was a head teacher as well. I think it's quite interesting. We're going to talk a lot tonight about depopulation. It's not just an issue for the Western Isles, it's an issue for a lot of remote and rural communities in Scotland. And it's interesting, I've been thinking about that because my dad and my Uncle Ian, so my dad's in his mid-70s, Uncle Ian passed away, but they are both examples of depopulation. It's not a new problem, right? Yeah. They're examples of depopulation. They both came from Balmerino Drive and ended up in neighbouring villages in the Edinburgh suburbs. and they didn't ever come back. Between them, 10 children, 18 grandchildren, they didn't go back. They are everywhere from America to New Zealand. And that is depopulation in action, because it is those people of my age and my children's age that places like this need. And I think a lot of the themes that we'll talk about tonight, digital connectivity, physical connectivity, employment opportunities, that's what we need to try to bottle somehow. The UK is so centralised, and Scotland is so centralised, and it's not like that in other countries. And it's a huge part of the reason why we have, as I say, not a new problem, but an ongoing problem which is worse than it probably has ever been before. So we need to look at why that is. So yeah, I mean, I'm here 2 or 3 times a year over in Bernera. It's a very special place for me as well. But I always do think when I come up here that there just aren't enough people like me living here. The locals may not agree with that, but there aren't enough people of my age, there aren't enough people of my children's age, and too many people leave and not enough people stay. And I think ultimately all the other things that we'll discuss are predicated on that population issue.
Yeah. I picked Geoff and Andy up from the airport today, and on the drive from the airport to my house, my family's house, all that Geoff was obsessed with was looking at various bits of the sea and going, so which way's Scotland and which way's America?
That is not how it...
You have been here before.
I have been here before. And I'm very delighted to be here. And can I just say, as a matter of record, it was my idea to come here. Not the two people with families here that should be urging. It was my idea to come here. So
Just don't know where it is.
Excuse my language, but bugger off the two of you. So the one thing I want to put on record firstly before I talk about the significance of being here tonight is thank Alison and Angus for their wonderful hospitality. That's Calum's parents. I had to do a few work calls and things, and they fed me a beautiful chicken lasagna, and Angus showed me around a wonderful garden with lots of local produce. Fabulous. Wonderful hospitality, and we'll be coming back, I can promise you that.
Good.
So, one very quick anecdote. The last time I was here was 2007 in the Scottish election campaign, immediately before the SNP won, I think. I'm looking at Torquil from Labour Party, actually, in 2007. And Alistair Allen was the candidate then, still is the MSP today. Alistair's a great guy, but we did a big rally in the Caberfay Hotel, am I right in saying that? Caberfay Hotel in Stornoway. And then we made our way overnight down to Harris, I believe, in Alistair's Nissan Micra. And Alistair had clearly been living in his car throughout the campaign. And I was sat in the back, Alex Salmond was in the front, and I was like, what is this? And it was his socks, and I'm not joking. So, Alistair, if he's listening, your socks were very, very smelly indeed. The significance of tonight is really important.
Yeah.
We are doing this Islands tour for a purpose, not just for fun, because there's no doubt that there are significant challenges facing our island communities, our rural communities at large. And I'm the first to admit that when we took over office from the Labour Party in 2007, one of the biggest problems for the Labour Party was this idea of a central belt bias, that everything was focused on the conurbation between Glasgow and Edinburgh. And it really resonated with voters out with the central belt. And I think there was a degree of truth in it. But I'm not sure the SNP have done enough in government to reverse that image, reverse that thought process. And I think there is lots of opportunity here. I know we'll talk about the risk, but there's lots of opportunity as well. And I think we have to put a spotlight on what that opportunity is.
Good. Well, that's why we're here. Right, let's crack on, shall we? Throughout the night, then, the whole idea is that we're here to talk. We're here to converse. Some of you have submitted questions already. We'll get to those. Throughout the night as well, put up your hand if you want to say anything. We can get a microphone to you. You can contribute. You can be part of this. That's the whole point. That's what we do. That is why we're here. And the person who is going to be the focal point of all of your questions and concerns and praise, I'm sure, is, well, what one article has described as, or who one article has described as Westminster's coolest MP. And he's bankrupted himself paying for that article, I am sure. Please welcome Torquil Crichton, the new Labour MP for this constituency. Hello.
Hello there.
Hello. Thanks for doing this.
No worries.
It's
Welcome.
great to see you.
Welcome to you all. I think you got Geoff wrong there.
Go on.
He wasn't looking at the sea. He was looking to see if there's any herring left in the sea. He's an East Coaster.
That's right, yeah.
And we have long memories of what East Coasters did to the Minch herring. And Andy, so shy as well, talking about his connections to the island. He didn't tell you about when he stood as Conservative candidate here.
Well, Torquil, it's
in
funny
2005.
you should mention that.
At least
How
tonight,
did that go, Andy?
at least tonight he turned up.
Did you not turn up for the declaration?
Oh no, not for the declaration. No.
Why not?
Well, I could.
He did a George Galloway.
He did a George Galloway.
I worked for at that point for David McCletchie, who many in this room may remember, and I had a lot of loyalty to David, and there was no Tory candidate for the Western Isles.
I wonder why.
I wonder why. And David said, "It'll be fine. We'll just put your name down on the paper, and your name will be." You know, you've got the name for it, you're a Maciver, you'll be fine. I said, David, my name's fine, it's the word that comes after the name on the ballot paper that's the problem, right? That's what's going to be very difficult. I came for one of the hustings, and when they realised I was a wind farm supporting atheist, it went downhill very, very quickly at that point.
Right.
I was not here for all of the events.
Lots of excuses there.
Well,
I think I should welcome you least of all.
Welcome me.
Yeah,
Why is that?
Until 4 weeks ago, I had a really nice column on page 2 of the Stornoway Gazette.
Well,
And suddenly, an interloper has...
you've made your very comfortable Westminster bed, Torquil. Now you need to lie in it. Speaking of which, how has your first week, 10 days or so, how's it been?
Helicopter pilots have this term when the helicopter is falling out of the sky and there's too much to do.
Yeah.
Task saturated.
Right.
And that's what it feels like. It just comes at you very fast, and most of it flies over your head. I've been in and around Westminster for almost 2 decades as a journalist, but you quickly realise when you turn up as an MP that you were looking at the match from the side of the pitch, and now you're on the pitch. And there's a lot to do. To keep the balls in the air. So it's a completely different, bizarre experience. Yeah. I know where the toilets are, and that's about all. And that's about all. That's my one advantage over it. And you meet, incredibly, from all sides, incredibly talented and diverse range of people who have expertise in all kinds of things you never knew existed, and they're all there to hopefully improve the country and make life better.
Calum, just remind me, I'm allowed to say this now. I don't know if for those avid listeners of the podcast, last week we had Angus Macdonald on, the new MP for Inverness West and
Skye and
Rothshire, yeah. They change the names every year.
Yeah. Lib Dem MP.
Annoying. Anyway, he was talking about the same experience you're going through. It's actually a whirlwind, being an MP. And I mentioned when I first turned up at Westminster before I went to the Scottish Parliament, I was showing around a very high-profile couple, and I'd only been there 2 weeks at this point. And I don't know if it's still there, so you need to find this out for me, but I think off just adjacent to one of the cafeterias is a room, and I was certain this was the stairs to the garden lobby, which would lead you to the parliamentary chamber, and it wasn't. And I walked in, and it was a salon, a hair salon, in a really tiny wee unit. And I looked round and I went, well, if you ever need your hair cut, this is where to come to these two guests. Now, I didn't reveal in the podcast last week who the guests were, but I believe it's okay to do so. It was Sean Connery and his wife, Lady Michelin. And I turned round to Sean Connery, who was bald at the time, and said, and if you ever need to get your hair cut, and I said, this is absolutely genuine. And Sean looked at me and he just went, Geoff, fuck off. Anyway, there you are. Sorry.
The only thing you need to know about that hair salon is that's where Neil Kinnock used to cut his hair.
Oh, is it? Is it still there?
Well, you don't want to go near it. Neil Kinnock used to cut his hair.
Torquil, I want to ask you, in this constituency, the swing at the election was quite something, actually. 22.6 percentage points. The average SNP Labour swing in Scotland at the election was 15.9 percentage points. Are you taking credit for that, or is that about the demise of the SNP and the kicking people here wanted to give them?
I hadn't quite realised these stats until they were pointed out to me earlier this week.
It's on page 2 of the Gazette from last Thursday.
Yeah, there you go, because things fly over your head. No, I worked hard at it, yes, for a year and a half, and there was a sea change coming and a wave of change coming, but that 22%, 22.5% swing, that means that it wasn't just Labour voters who voted for me, that means it was people from all parties and none. When that happens, and people came up to me and spoke to me, people who'd been 3 generations SNP, for example, who said they were moving their vote across.
Wow.
You feel the weight of that. You feel, the emotional investment people have made in their own party and in their own campaigning over a lifetime, and they're willing to move that trust to you, and you really feel that.
Yeah.
Sorry,
No.
really feel that responsibility come to you. So 22 point whatever the percentage is, you just know it's everyone's votes, and that you're there to represent everyone. So you feel weight in that.
Yeah.
That's what you feel.
What do you see in terms of, do you see some similarities? I mean, something similar obviously happened to Labour. You were a journalist at the time, so you're on a different side of the fence now, but that sort of wholesale shift from the SNP to Labour that we saw the other week has happened in the recent past from Labour to the SNP.
Absolutely. Yeah.
What do you see the similarities as being? Is it complacency more than anything else? Is it lack of delivery? What causes that sort of wholesale shift across the country?
Well, being out of touch. Labour was out of touch with its electorate and with the feeling of the country in Scotland anyway, at that time, same as the SNP are now. But I think we're in an era of super swings. We're seeing big shifts, big shifts in France, big shifts in Scotland in 2015. Boris got a big swing in 2019, the Red Wall fell, although obviously the Scottish Red Wall had fallen earlier than that. And now we're in a big wide swing to Labour, and when like the morning after the election, and I didn't know what the majority was, I just knew you'd got what was necessary, I boarded a plane and went down to Glasgow so I'd be with the other, I didn't expect there to be 36 other Labour MPs, to be honest, and of course when I arrived I was really warmly greeted and hugged by all the journalists who I knew, but I didn't know who these other guys were. And we all got up on a podium and had a picture taken. And when you stepped off the podium, because I went down to speak to the journalists straight away, very wide podium, only so high. And that's how the vote is. We've gone very wide, but people really want you to deliver now. As you were saying, Geoff, earlier, people expect delivery, not just from the UK government, but from both governments working together. And that's the tone I took in my election campaign address, and it's a tone Starmer struck when he came to Edinburgh the following Sunday, and it's been maintained by Ian Murray and everybody else as well. People expect 2 governments now to work together to deliver for them.
Just on that particular point, and firstly, stunning result, by the way, as Calum points out. It's no mean feat. I've been in and around politics for 20 years, and to buck the trend in a positive sense, even further than your party colleagues did elsewhere, is no mean feat. I suppose I'd reflect on a couple of things, though, and you just touched on it there. We're in big swing elections. I believe the electorate to be very sophisticated. Labour Party very professionally executed a campaign which was disciplined around this theme of change and getting rid of the Tories, and they did it exceptionally well. The people out there know what they're voting for and they know what they're voting against. It's too simplistic to say this was simply against the Tories. I do believe, and I've said it on the podcast before, that the SNP have that degree of malaise around them just now. But a Holyrood election is a different beast, and that's only 2 years away. And I also note that the Labour's most northerly mainland seat is Stirling. There's a hell of a lot of land above that that's not as convinced yet. Yes, there were swings to them in that seat. So what is it, Torkel, that the Labour Party have to do in the next 5 years, indeed the next 2 years, to gain the trust and confidence of those voters beyond the central belt on the mainland, accepting...
Well, first of all, it was a change election, and you ask why the swing was so big here. It was also a connection election, because this place, these islands, and lots of rural Scotland has been misunderstood and taken for granted and neglected by a government in Edinburgh and not understood and ignored by a government in London. So what Labour offered here was a direct connection, and that worked as much as the offer of change. Now what does that mean? What has to come? Obviously, you have to improve people's lives. People have to feel better off and that their situation, their lives have improved over the next 4 years than they did in the previous one. Now, and the first change you come when Andy said, it's not going to be such a big change. Well, what's the big change is you're going to have stability. You're going to have grown-up government, less trauma, less drama, and people getting on with doing the right thing, growing the economy, improving people's lives. And the King's Speech will have some of these measures, like a new deal on wages, a new deal for working people, the end of zero-hour contracts, a new emphasis on health, and a focus on young people. All the things you want to deliver, and you want the change you want here. I think we'll fill that. But certainly, people are going to have to see. And you say you're right. Like this election is 2024, midway through 24. The campaign for 26, I guess, starts now. I mean, I've changed the name of my WhatsApp group from Win24 to Win26. So the momentum carries on. And the UK Labour government has a short period of time to kind of show Scots and show people that they're working with them and for them.
Just before we get on, we've got a few sort of particular big issues we want to get through, but your questions and your comments are also very welcome. You talked about working, the two governments that serve this place. Have you had a meeting with Alistair L and the MSP for the Western Isles yet in your new capacity?
Yeah, we've had a call and exchanged numbers and pleasantries and agreement to work together on common themes, like, for example, a fish farm processing factory closed here last week. Yeah. 77 jobs bounced out into the wider economy is a big thing. There's no reason at all why we can't have a common approach to helping to solve that. So we've done things like that, of course we have.
Interesting, good. Right, we want to get on. Lots of you have been submitting questions through the day-to-day already, and I have to say that one of the absolute key themes emerging from so many of your questions was around energy and renewable energy, the energy future of this place, of Scotland, of the UK, all part of the same conversation. And so what we're going to do throughout the evening as we tackle these sorts of issues is welcome people to join us here and to be part of the conversation in addition to you as well. So for this part of the evening, please welcome Murdo McRitchie, who is Vice Chair of Urus Galson, a community land group for the north of Lewis. Murdo. Welcome. Thanks very much for being here. Have a seat. Have a seat. And Murdo, I have to say, you were quick off the mark when we were asking for questions on energy. I think it's worth just a quick sort of bit of CV as to what your interest is, basically.
Yeah, sure. So I'm Vice Chair with Urus in Galson for the north of Lewis. I'm here tonight in a personal capacity, but I'm also I work in Aberdein in the oil and gas industry, so I commute there on a Monday to Friday basis, and then I come home at the weekend with my family are based here in Ness. So that's my quick CV. So I've been kind of in the oil and gas industry for 23 years. So,
And talk to us then about what you see as the potential for the Western Isles, for Lewis and beyond, when it comes to renewables, because realistically that's the conversation we're having tonight on energy.
Yeah, I think so. I think the one thing that's quite clear about the shift to renewable energy is the one thing we've got here in the islands is plenty of wind. Huge potential here. We've got a fabrication yard in Stornoway here. We've got a deep water port. We've got a number of key facilities here, things that point towards us being able to take full advantage of these things. I think probably the one thing that probably causes me a bit of concern as an islander here is our ability to take full advantage of that. And the one thing I fear is that there's this kind of overarching kind of absence of a strategy to bring all this together, all the different strands of this, because I'm not kind of seeing where that's coming from, and I don't know what the body is or the people. Who is it? There's a gap there. There's a vacuum there, and that's one of the things I'd like to kind of understand better.
Okay. And in terms of the specifics of that, this Labour government have promised GB Energy, for example. Do you think that has the answers to the questions that you have?
I think it could do. I think it'd be good to actually understand more about it. I think I've loved the debates on the podcast here about where it's going to be, and I think that's fascinating. I think I want to know what it's going to be. I think it'd be really interesting from a national point of view, and also more parochially here for the islands. What's it going to be? What's it going to mean for us here on the island?
Just to give some added context, I mean, the Western Isles and the Western Seaboard are going to be at the centre of the renewables revolution. Like the power map of Britain is going to be folded up in half from all the coal mining industries of the last century up into Scotland, and the map of Scotland is going to be folded in its north-south axis, and all that energy and expertise that developed the North Sea will now develop the Atlantic seaboard. There's going to be something like, if they all go ahead, something like 150 turbines onshore and offshore here in the next couple of decades, which would power something like 2 million homes across the UK and export enough energy for hydrogen production, for example, create enough energy for hydrogen production, hydrogen export. All that may or may not happen, and lots of dominoes have to be lined up for all that to happen, including a massive interconnector between the UK mainland and the Isle of Lewis. And the concern that Murdo touches on, and that lots of people have expressed to me, is that they accept we are going to have to change how we produce energy in order to save the planet, basically, to stop the planet burning. But who's going to benefit from that? Are we going to be like Shetland was in the 70s, when carbon came there, when oil came there, and Shetland was able to grab some of that for itself and create its own sovereign wealth fund? Or are we going to see power lines go over our head and profits go over our head? And that's what we don't want to see. We want to put communities first in this revolution. We want to see community benefit, and GB Energy and the Labour government talk about community benefit. I think people are cynical about community benefit. I think when they hear community benefit, they think five-a-side football strips and maybe AstroTurf, the five-a-side football strip. Yeah. I think personally that should take the form of community share, that the GB Energy investment in all these developments should be our share, our direct monetary share coming back to our communities. Okay. I think there should be consumer benefit, because if we're going to be producing power for 2 million homes, from an area with the highest fuel poverty figures in the UK, then I think the case for a tariff or negating that fuel poverty writes itself. And the third and most important thing is that here in the Western Isles we have more community-owned turbines and community-owned wind farms than anywhere else in the UK, really. We have more expertise and knowledge on that, and there has to be a community involvement in that. These communities have to get access to the grid and connections to make profits for their own communities.
I think we've got a big problem coming our way, actually, to be honest. We do a lot of work with renewable developers, and it's not the fault of the developers or the producers, because they're playing by the rules. The problem, I think, is that I think there's going to basically be a rebellion in lots of communities around the country, around the coast, because they are places like here, like Orkney and Shetland, where we'll be going over the next couple of months to do these podcasts, are looking at their kitchen table at the biggest energy bills in the country, and then looking out of their window at a turbine and saying, what's in it for me? And the answer too often is not a lot. Interconnectors are actually a physical manifestation of that, because people look at them and say that's what's taking all our power to the mainland to give them cheap electricity, while we get the most expensive stuff in the country. That is, I think, ultimately going to require a total rethink at central government level of how all that works, because ultimately you need to have local people consenting to what goes on. And whilst at the moment there's a certain powerlessness over some of it, a lot of what's required for renewable energy needs to be onshore. It needs planning consent, it needs local consent, and I think increasingly there's a problem coming for government in that too many local people in all these remote and rural places feel that they just don't get the benefit from that, particularly in the form of affordable energy prices. And ultimately I think something is pretty substantial is going to have to change about the whole matrix and the rules around all that.
There's an imperative to do it. There's a reason why we have to move away from carbon, although we'll be in the North Sea for 30 or 40 more years while we exhaust carbon. There's no point in a transition to something if it ain't there. So we have to build all that infrastructure and get all these dominoes in a row. But that's going to be and I agree, it's going to be a hugely painful process unless you take communities with you and involve communities and reward communities directly for their sacrifice, their part in this. Unless you put communities first, it's not going to work.
Yeah, I like my energy, and is this me?
Are we good? I'm not sure who it is. Let's work out what's going on.
Sorry.
You carry on.
Yeah, I'll carry on. Right.
We can hear you anyway.
Live TV.
/ audio podcast.
Is it my one?
Chris is coming to save the day.
Okay.
Fear not.
Cut this out.
Have you got? Yeah, we'll edit this. Joe will edit this out. Well done, Joe. How are you? Has anybody got any questions immediately about they might want to ask of Torkel or of anybody else here? Have a little think. Pop your hand up in a second, and once we're happy that Geoff's working, we can get back to it. You happy, Chris? I think we're happy, right? Geoff, go on. It's fine. Nobody will notice when we do it for real. This is just the rehearsal.
So we're on the. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yeah?
Yeah, good.
Go for it.
So, you mentioned something that was really interesting. You said about Scotland, we need to see if these may happen or not. Torkel, they have to happen.
Yeah, there's an imperative to do
They
it.
have.
We all understand that.
They have to happen. And I want to just give you a bit of optimism, because I am from Aberdein. I'm thoroughly involved in a lot of what's going on there. We've just had a new deep water port, £420 million spent to service offshore renewables, largely high-value manufacturing because the supply chain's based there. We've had the first floating wind project just approved off the coast of Buchan. It's only, and I'm going to put this in monetary terms for you all, it's 560 megawatts, and the company has committed to putting its HQ in Aberdein, and it's going to be £800 million worth of supply chain content for Scotland. So let's transfer this to the Western Isles. There's 3 projects that we're immediately close to here. Sheila, Talisk and Vary. The operation and maintenance expenditure in the supply chain statements that these operators have committed to is £335 million over the next 20 to 30 years. That's just the O&M, so we're not even talking about the assembly yet. That's huge. The potential is huge. Now, you've got a wonderful new infrastructure project here, and I believe we're going to be talking to Alex soon, so I don't want to go into that in too much detail, but we need more. And that should be the starting point, not the end point, the starting point for this constituency. If we make a go of this, that can service alongside the University of Highlands and Islands, supporting the right courses, employment opportunities for our younger people, so they can say, do you know what, I do have the opportunity to progress a really meaningful career here if I choose to stay. And that's the opportunity that we need to bring. And I know you agree with that, Torkel, but you talked about governments working together. The problem that you might have with GB Energy is that those offshore wind projects are in the power view of the Scottish Government because they're devolved to the Crown Estate, Scotland. So you do need to work with them if GB Energy is going to be a success, and you're going to take an equity stake and have some left over for the community and make sure that there's a sustainable fund for the community, not just for strips and astroturf, as you rightly point out, but meaningful long-term infrastructure benefit for the communities here. So that's the first point. There has to be collaboration. But secondly, and you touched on it yourself, interconnectors, grid connections. We are miles off as a country on the investment in this expenditure. Miles off. And we can blame the Tories and we can blame the SNP to a lesser extent. They haven't got that much responsibility for this. But this has been 30, 40 years in the making. We should have been investing massively in our connections. And we need to do that now. So it's all very well, we've got port infrastructure expenditure promised by the Labour government. Get us the grid connections, the private sector can take over the port infrastructure, and we can create meaningful long-term benefits and opportunities for our younger generations for the future of their careers and the careers of the people in the room.
I agree with almost all of that. The potential is massive. So is the concern. There's people concerned that they're going to be bypassed, that their communities are going to be trampled on, that they're going to be left behind. And I hope it can't be beyond the wit of man to reward communities, because in Denmark, 50% of all wind farm developments have a community share. Germany is the same. We must be able to do the same here. And Murdo is by my side. You know, there are people that are sceptical. These planned turbines are only 3 or 4 miles offshore. People feel they're going to be overshadowed by them. They're going to be very close to them. And was Murdo himself, who has lots of technical expertise, but drew a very simple graph for me last year with an X and a Y bar. X community support, Y community benefit, and if the line goes up, the more community benefit, the more community support. And you won't do it without community support.
Yeah.
Absolutely, Geoff. And I think probably that big thing getting beyond that astroturfs and football pitches and all that kind of stuff, it's got to be something that changes people's lives. You know, I mean, I was reading somewhere last year, something about the whole housing stock in Scotland would cost £40 billion to transform it, to get into the right state, to make it insulated and all the rest of it. And we're no stranger to that in the Western Isles here. The whole housing stock here would have to be upgraded as well. I think most of us outside of Stornoway are living with green kerosene tanks out the back of our houses as well. So we've all got to make personal investments in our house to change to electricity, for heating our homes and things like that. And if we're going to use our cars, to change to electricity. I mean, these are massive changes we've got to make in our lives, massive investments we've each got to make. And I think I think probably people are nervous about that. They're seeing these big projects coming in, not really understanding where we fit into it. You know, where do we fit into that? What does it mean to us?
We need, and community-owned developers like Golson show the way. Something over £2 million a year comes into communities from community-owned wind farms in Lewis and Harris, which is more than one of the commercial planned stations would give it over its lifetime.
Yeah. So would you, out of interest then on all of this, would you commit to blocking or doing your best to block any sort of wind farm project that the community did not approve of the benefits they were going to receive from? Would you step in as the MP for this place and say, that's not good enough for my people, and I'm stopping that?
There are so many processes and uncertainties, and this shouldn't be left to a single local, one of the smallest local authorities in Britain to handle on its own. If GB Energy means anything, then there should be that kind of backup of legal, technical, planning, expertise coming in, because the transformation, even in this part of the world, the Western Isles, and the rest of it, is going to be massive. That's got to be part of GB Energy's remit as well. And there are so many competing and elements that have to be balanced out before anything goes ahead. What we know is that the onshore ones are already licensed; they'll go ahead. The offshore ones, the license were granted, as you say, Geoff, through the Crown Estate Commission and through the ScotWind. Sold cheaply, it has to be said. All sold in a oneer. The whole coastline of Scotland was sold off cheaply, and the money wasn't used to kind of set up the sovereign wealth fund that Labour have now promised. The Scottish Government didn't do that. They've just used it as daily expenditures. So that already the opportunity is being missed. It's kind of slipping through our fingers. So yes, I agree with Murdo. We need a strategy, and a strategy that puts communities at the heart of this.
The important thing about that, I think, and there's room for optimism, I think, here, is that if you speak privately to local MPs, MSPs, to developers, to Crown Estate Scotland, if you speak privately to these people, everybody knows that something has to change about the whole operation of the system, because everybody knows that, just as Torkel said, you have to bring people with you, because ultimately you can go so far thinking that you don't have to bring people with you and you can just steamroller it, but it will fall eventually.
Yeah, there's a very good reason the Tories didn't build onshore wind farms.
Yeah, so I mean, and privately they all accept that. Torkel said it's not beyond the wit of man, and it's not, because all these people get that. Octopus, the boss of Octopus, was in the newspaper today or yesterday, I can't remember, saying effectively this, saying that we have to create a model where the communities that benefit the most from production are the ones where the production takes place. Is it beyond the wit of government, is actually the question. Not is it beyond the wit of man, because we know it's not. And all the private conversations that we all around this these sofas have, we know that people get this. The issue is government. And it comes back a lot to what you said right at the start, of course, about this urban-rural divide in policy, and whether or not, because the Scottish Government wants these options fees, it wants this revenue, because it wants to spend it in the Central Belt. And this is where the big issue comes up. At one point, they're going to effectively be forced to change the way this works.
Yeah, we will have to get in, at basement level with GB Energy and make our case. As I have been throughout my campaign, and I took Anas Sarwar up here during the campaign and made sure he had a round table with community energy companies. He didn't need convincing, really, but
so he was on board.
He was able to speak to them and get the message that this has to be community.
So can I just tease out with you? You mentioned something earlier about a sovereign wealth fund as Labour's plans. I've not heard that.
Yeah, I think that's. I hope I haven't misquoted Labour manifesto, but there is a plan to set up a wealth fund similar to the Norwegian wealth fund to reinvest.
So just to tease that out then again, because Scotland, INTOG, sorry for the technical terms, but essentially the offshore wind developments, fixed and floating, they are again in Crown Estate Scotland's power. So how does a UK government ensure that there's a sovereign wealth fund from a devolved set of licenses? Are we chatting to the First Minister about how you combine that effort to ensure, as you put it, community, long-term sustainable community benefit?
My ultimate aim would be a Western Isles sovereign wealth fund, so that communities are either through arm's length investment.
Following the Shetland model.
Why send the money to Edinburgh or London? Yeah, we can deal with it here.
Good answer.
Any questions? Oh, there's some applause. Love that. Great. Any questions at this point? I've got a few that have been submitted. I'm wondering if David Mackay is in the room and wants to ask any of his questions. David, are you here? I'm here. Yeah, would you like to take part, David? Put your hand up, we'll get a microphone to you. If you're able, are you able to stand up just so we can see you? Thank you very much. Go for it. What would you like to ask, David?
That's the third part of my ask is community involvement, and the first part in terms of consumer benefit that GB Energy, by investing in these projects, should bring lower bills for everyone. I think there should be even lower bills for us here, because we'll be producing a lot of the power here, and we have some of the highest fuel poverty figures here as well. And there's obviously going to be the kind of massive warm homes conversion, as Mona talked about. Most people use heating oil here. It's encouraging when I was going around during the campaign, actually, that there's quite a lot of like heat pumps, and people are moving across. And I asked everybody how they worked, because some people are sceptical about whether they work or not. Most people seem happy with them.
Okay.
And the question David raised about all this energy we're going to produce or potentially produce onshore and offshore in West Isles has to go down a cable, an interconnector, this big cable, and it already appears full. Yeah. It already appears full with commercial operators, and with each commercial operator that comes along, they appear to get space ahead of community projects which have been in the making for quite a while. So communities are up against this first come, first served mentality, which I think has to change at the highest level, either by regulation or legislation. Communities have to be given the chance, the opportunity to get on, but they also need help to get on, because if you're a oil multinational or a mining multinational setting up a wind farm company, you have the legal expertise, you have the technical expertise, you have the boffins to help you. Here you have retired accountants and volunteers, much like the people who run the Point Show are also people who could potentially run the wind farm. So you're relying on people who often have expertise in some areas, but not in all. And so they need professional backup to get on. They need professional legal advice. That's why GB Energy needs a community energy unit, I'd say. When the Labour government came in '97, the Scotland Office set up a community land unit to help communities, give them the expertise and legal backup and technical backup to buy the land for themselves. Highly successful. We need to do the same thing.
Where should it be?
Huh?
Where should that bit of GB
Well,
energy
of course, I'd want it, in Sordal,
Yeah. Good answer. There's expertise there
but
too.
actually, you had Angus Macdonald on last week who wanted it in Malig, and Geoff laughed at him because he wanted it in Aberdein, as you would imagine. And actually, where the nameplate isn't as important as what it does.
Sure.
So long as it does the job
Yeah.
and puts communities first, and as David argued there, allows communities to get onto the grid, it's vital that they
Yeah.
do, then it doesn't.
But you know what puts community first? Is jobs, job opportunities, future
Yeah.
career opportunities. That's what really puts community first. And I think, let's reflect on the facts here. Since the first oil in the United Kingdom continental shelf, there's been 200,000 million, 20 billion pounds, not adjusted for inflation, flowed into the exchequer in London. So your point about a sovereign wealth fund is well made. If only Margaret Thatcher had seen the opportunity, we would be all dancing to a gold-livered party. We weren't. We haven't, right? We now have this new opportunity. But there's one thing we're missing. Who's going to pay for this? The Labour Party have already said throughout the campaign that they're reducing their expenditure on green prosperity. They're bringing green prosperity significantly. Billions of pounds they can't, because they're looking at the fiscal position very difficult as it is. We know that some of our oil and gas companies have bought the biggest ScotWind licenses, and yet they don't feel comfortable to invest because of the exorbitant tax rates they're faced and some of the rhetoric coming from your Labour colleagues. One stat,
like exorbitant tax rates.
but one stat to leave you with. Yeah. This year, in the Office for National Statistics, they showed that in 2023, our rate of imports of oil and gas increased to 40% because nobody was investing in the UK continental shelf. Imports. We get no economic benefit from imports. No jobs, no skills, no balance of payments benefit. But let me just finish this point, because it's really, really important. You might think they're buggers and all the rest of it, and these horrible oil and gas giants, they've got money. They've got a hell of a lot of money. Bring them on the journey with you. We already know they want to invest in offshore wind, so say to them, as part of GB Energy, we don't have the money for GB Energy, you do. So I tell you what, guys, this offshore wind project's 10, 15 years away from, we haven't even started, there's not 1 gram of steel of offshore wind in the North Sea, or indeed in the Atlantic right now, or the Irish Sea.
Well,
So my point is this: bring them on the journey with you. They've got the expertise. You just said it yourself.
Yeah.
So say to them, if you invest in renewables, right, we will incentivize your proposition so you can fund this bloody transition and not have the taxpayer paying it. That'll be better for communities. That'll be better for every constituency across the country.
Yeah, I agree with much of that, but you know as well as I do that lack of investment, that withdrawal of investment, didn't happen because of the prospect of a Labour government. It happened because of the chaos
But it
of a
wasn't
Conservative
helped, though,
government.
It wasn't help. I agree with you on the Tories, but it
Prime
wasn't
Ministers
help.
that lasted 45 days and brought in
wasn't help.
ridiculous budgets. Serious money, serious investment was held back from the UK 3-4 years ago, when people saw Boris Johnson coming down the track.
And it's not coming
And
down
what
the
Labour has had to do in opposition is try and assure these investors that it will provide stability, that it will provide economic growth, and will give them a platform investment. And of course it can't be done without
They're not reassured at all.
without the investment of multinational companies.
A couple of quick closing thoughts on energy.
Yeah, I think we're going to get this wrong if we start looking at it as a sort of multinational versus community thing. We need multinationals, we need their people, we need their profits. I wouldn't have massive windfall taxes. I would, just as Geoff said, I would say to them, we're not going to tax you, but we're going to say you've got to put a certain percentage into renewable development, right? That's a perfectly obvious thing to do. The problem here is not caused by the multinationals. They're playing by the rules that are put in front of them. That's what they do. There's nothing wrong with that. And they have critical expertise. The problem is caused by the frameworks that are put in place by both governments. And I don't think, Torkel, I'm afraid, I don't think any of the Labour rhetoric ahead of the election at all helped this industry. At all, not one bit. So I do think we need to stop looking at it in terms of these siloed or community good, multinational bad. It doesn't work like that. There's room for everybody to participate in this. We just need a better framework to make sure they can.
And Murdo, just to conclude.
Yeah, I think what I pick up about that is with the oil and gas companies, the one thing that they've got is options, international options. If they don't like the kind of environment and the view it's been uninvestable, they'll move their capital elsewhere. I think the one thing I would say, just going back to my own thoughts around the energy transition, when that started in earnest, I think really the first conversations I really heard in anger in 2019. And I think the one thing that slightly concerns me is the pace of the transition. We know it needs to go fast for the obvious reasons. The thing that would worry me about that is it goes so fast that it leaves the supply chain behind. And what they can't cope with goes abroad to get done. And I think that would be a real mistake. So there's got to be something in there. I don't know how that works. I don't know how we do that, but there's something that would be a massive opportunity that we'll miss here.
Yeah. I share that concern too, that the Labour government may repeat the mistake of the SNP, Scottish government, and chase targets too quickly, not leave the supply chain behind, but leave communities behind.
Really interesting. Here concludes our conversation on energy. Thank you to Murdo, thank you Torkel. Thanks though Murdo, you can take a seat. Thank you. Good. Are we warming up? We all good? We all having fun? It's an audio event. It's an audio event. I can't say it enough.
Overwhelming.
Do get stuck in. And towards the end, by the way, we're just going to have a bit of a free-for-all where you can ask Geoff and Andy anything. So if you've got any questions for these two, then feel free. Right, you will be aware that the Aberdein Celtic Festival begins just out there, actually, on Wednesday. If you throw a stone, you'll hit the tent, but don't do that. If you look out the window, you'll see it. Lots of work already underway, and lots, I think, therefore, that we can talk about with the fairly newly appointed Festival Operations Coordinator, Carol Ferguson, who joins us this evening. Hi, Carol.
Hi.
Great to see you.
Hi.
Have a seat. Gosh, yes, you took on your role in March.
I did.
Is that enough time to put a festival on, Carol? I'm worried for you.
No. So I'd been volunteering for 10 years with the festival previous to going full time with them.
Yeah.
I thought I knew a lot about HibCelt. I didn't.
It's a huge thing.
Yeah,
I think
huge
actually
learning
put it in
curve.
context, because there'll be people listening to the podcast now who are perhaps not as familiar with the Aberdein Celtic Festival, and so put it in its context as to what it does for this place.
So HibCelt is basically a highlight of the calendar for many businesses in the Western Isles, especially in Lewis and Harris. So many of those businesses are reliant on tourists, and how many people this brings to the island and the spend not only for the festival, but in all the local cafes, the local shops, hotels, everything. Our economic impact last year was 3.6 million, and over the 27 years that the festival has been running, we've brought in 34 million to the local economy.
Amazing.
So
it's huge.
that's a weekend, it's like a Wednesday to Saturday, £3 million. It's a massive cultural dynamo, which of course, gives, free advertising for the Hebrides for the rest of the year as well. And the amazing thing about it, it's largely run by volunteers. That's the most absolutely amazing thing about it. Of course, it's a commercial festival, it tries to clean its face, but it's almost entirely staffed by a small core of professional people who know what they're doing, and a large team of volunteers who put on, the greatest gig in the grounds that you'll see.
Yeah, absolutely. In terms of the challenges then the festival faces, because a lot of these will feed into this conversation that we can have this evening on politics and policy, what are some of those challenges?
So I think our biggest challenges that we're facing at the moment is rising costs. So since the pandemic, the costs of everything have gone through the roof. We bring everything for the festival to the island. So everything's transported from the mainland. So you're looking at your costs of haulage, your staging, your lighting, your tents, everything we have to bring in. And those costs they're exorbitant at the moment. And with that goes huge cuts to public sector funding.
Wow.
So we are seeing huge cuts across Creative Scotland, Event Scotland to the funding, and then the impact that's having on us as an organisation.
This probably gets us into a little bit of kind of logistics, infrastructure, these sorts of things, because you're moving things by road, you're moving things by ferry. Is that a challenge?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, Calmac are fantastic. They support us so much with the festival. But just even having the mezzanine deck broken at the moment, the impact that that is then having on us, not only on our logistics but also on our volunteers and people coming to the festival. The ferry capacity is reduced, so that we've got people not able to come. We've actually had bookings cancelled, so there was people booked to come to the festival that when the mez deck broke, they then got their bookings cancelled, so they can't come anymore. So that is it's a huge impact.
Yeah, it's like the string that connects you to the mainland. It's withered. Yeah. It's frayed, and we all know the saga of Calmac, or certainly everybody in this room knows the saga of Calmac. But it is that incredible, and sometimes the focus is often on the logistical exercise, which it is repeated every year, and how it's done by volunteers, and the great intangible benefit that brings in terms of cultural celebration expression. But of course the other element of it, the biggest element of it, are the artists themselves, the performers, and after COVID, after a year and a bit of not having any live music, it almost brings a tear to your eye to get to a gig. You really, really appreciate live music and the performances that are given.
Are you going this week?
I'm on duty on Parliament on Friday night, but I have Calum tickets for Nahogany on Saturday night, which I'm not going to be using. Oh. And for the audience who don't know Nahogany are like the Gaelic version of ABBA.
Oh, right.
They were kind of a
70s
superstars who are still magically going.
What's the Gaelic for Mamma Mia?
I think it's probably the same as the Swedish for Mamma Mia. So, I mean, it's a big week.
Yeah,
it's the biggest week in the calendar. And there's a very sweet kind of coda to that big week, because of course it's a Wednesday to Saturday festival. Mm-hmm. It doesn't trip over into the Sunday, which is still observed here. The Sabbath is still observed. But every hungover, camped out, beard out festival goer that tries to troop to the ferry on Sunday morning can go past the free church, which offers breakfasts, free breakfasts to festival goers on the Sunday morning, just to see them off.
Nice.
Well.
Yeah, and it just shouldn't be this precarious, is the truth. And don't get me wrong, I hate getting put on the mez, right? Because it just takes forever to get off the ferry then. However, when it's not there, you notice the impact. It has a huge impact because the capacity is not that big anyway, and the impact is massive. It shouldn't be this precarious, and the truth is, I think sometimes the governments in Edinburgh and London are lucky that people in Scotland don't look outside the borders too often. If you start looking at countries in Europe, they do not have infrastructure that is running as hot as ours, that is as precarious as ours is. It just doesn't happen in other places. I think I'm right in saying, I'm sure somebody from Calmac will correct me if I'm wrong, but I think I'm right in saying that just to be a sustainable ferry service, they need 1.5 new ferries every year. Wow. Now, we've been talking about the Glen Sannox and Hull 802, I can't remember what that one's being called, and that's fine. They're a kind of example of a lot of what's going wrong, but that's 2 ferries, right? We're needing 1.5 every year. That's 2 ferries we've been talking about for a decade now. We're not even scratching the surface here, and that is, of course, just on ferries and just in one part of the country.
That's only crisis number 1, and people here are almost exhausted talking about the need for ferries to the islands. But the ferries between the islands,
yes, between
Harris and Hughes, Bernera, and between Eriskay and Barra, inter-island ferries that connect this place, they're fraying as an aged swell, and they need replaced.
Almost even worse. And we're going to Kirkwall and Lerwick, and there's major inter-island ferry problems there. The average age of ferries in Shetland is nearly 40. So there are huge problems in all these places. And a lot of it is the Central Belt issue that we've talked about. A lot of it is infrastructure spending being focused on places where there's a clearer return on financial investment rather than a social return on investment, which is different. But there's also just a lack of ambition. There's a lack of creativity about how to solve these problems. How often do you go to government and they say, sorry, there's no money, you can't do anything? Well, there is money, actually. There are lots of creative ways to find money. Just last week, the Irish announced a new 50-mile motorway, 50 miles of brand new motorway, deliberately built between Cork and Limerick in the west, quite deliberately to take business away from Dublin, to make sure that it wasn't centralised, to take it west, to make sure it was spread around the country. A new motorway with new service areas that makes climate compatibility, that's 5 times safer, and that's tolled because it's invested, because it's built through private investment. Something that every country in Europe does to build infrastructure all the time. They will get private investment and they will toll the infrastructure so that it can happen quickly and so that it can be delivered. And people don't mind paying for it because they'd rather have it. We don't look at these things creatively at all. STPR2 from the Scottish Government, which in fairness I think is a good idea, has inter-island tunnels proposed in the Sound of Harris and the Sound of Barra. I don't think tunnelling from islands to mainland is a good idea because you'll lose that relationship, I think, between islands. But tunnelling between islands, as the Faroes have shown, is a critical way to repopulate. It's a critical way to ensure that business grows and that people stay and that people come. But as I say, we hit a brick wall in this country because we just turn around and say, oh, we can't afford it, we don't have any money, sorry. Austerity, there's no money. Well, get money, raise money, get investment from private capital. Toll these roads, toll these tunnels. There are creative ways to make a revolutionary change in these places so that we're not arguing about 18 spaces on a ferry that means people can't get to a festival that's critically important for the islands. It is embarrassing, our infrastructure in this country.
Yeah, I take the point massively on thinking creatively. And, I think about hold with my train of thought here, this is a bit out there, but I think about football matches. When Aberdein qualify for European football, not as much as they used to, but they still do occasionally.
We're going way out with reality here.
They put on charter flights from Aberdein to wherever we may go in Europe. They just did it for the Euros, extra flights. So, yes, the challenges are there, and they're despicable. Let's be clear. It's a nonsense what's happened with the ferries. So you've got this wonderful festival that presumably you want to grow its profile. And I want to ask you a question about Creative Scotland in a second, but why aren't we thinking out the box and saying that's the weekend or the week to be in the Western Isles and putting on charter flights from Aberdein to Stornoway, from Dundee to Stornoway, because that's the week of the festival that we want to be there. And incidentally, I had to travel from Aberdein at 5 o'clock this morning down to Edinburgh to get across to Stornoway today, and there used to be a direct flight.
Geoff, welcome to the life.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah,
and it's
they have to do that journey every fortnight.
And it is a nonsense, particularly given the conversation we've just had. But just come back to the point we've just been discussing, right? Public finances are tight. The UK government have accepted that. The Scottish government have certainly accepted that. We can all disagree about the roots of all that. But we've just talked about these multinational companies with all that money, and you're talking about community benefit. Maybe we can start thinking creatively and saying, right, you buggers, you're going to pay for our flights. You're going to pay for a new bloody ferry. And let's start making them invest in our communities that way, so it's not just AstroTurf, so it's not just football strips. That's the way to do it.
Scotland doesn't have a good track record with tolls, remember? If you remember the Skye Bridge, which was like a ransom strip to the island. The M6 toll works, because there's an alternative you can take if you don't. And I assume that one in Ireland as well, that there's an A road parallel that you could take. That doesn't work. So you can't do it where it's a lifeline service.
You can. Every other country in Europe does it. I mean, look at the A9, right? Why wouldn't Labour say, you know what? We're not waiting 25 years to dual this road. This road should have been dual 25 years ago. We're not going to wait another 25 years to do it. Let's rip up all these contracts and let's bring private investment in and say, right, we're going to bring everybody in, we're going to get this done in 3 years, and we're going to charge you 15 quid to drive up the A9. I'd pay it.
But that's a toll on development, on expanding the economy, which you wouldn't pay if you were taking the A96 to Aberdeen.
We're the only country in Europe that thinks of it like that. We are the only country in Europe that thinks about it. You can't move on a motorway in Europe without paying a toll. We're the only country that thinks this way.
Wait there.
Would you not rather have it now
than
in 25 years?
Hi. 100 people in the room this evening. It's an audio podcast. By way of emphatic applause or silence, applause means you would pay £15 to drive up the A9 if it was dual carriage, all of that, you were getting
to have it now rather
than for the delay. By way of applause, do you like the idea? There's a big sigh at the front. There's one person likes the idea.
Andy's mum is in the audience.
Go on, son. But that
is
in
the choice
itself is
though, right?
interesting.
Because
But it's an interesting choice, isn't
the
it?
choice.
That actually, would you take that for whatever 10 years or something in order to pay it? Get it now, job done, job delivered. You don't like the idea of it at all.
No, not if it hinders economic development. And it's like a ransom stripped on Highland development. If the A9 was a toll road, of course it would be a ransom on Highland development, because that obstacle to development wouldn't be in the way of Aberdein, wouldn't be in the way of Edinburgh, Fife, or the border. So it would only be on the Highlands.
Well, I would actually toll every road, to be honest, and abolish road tax and vehicle excise duty, but that's a different...
I think we have to rethink the way we pay for roads, like road tax
absolutely.
and things like that, and how we use it, and how fuel duty as we move on to electric. That's all got to be rethought.
Okay, guys, good conversation. Carol, thank you. Who are you most looking forward to having at the Heb Celt this week? Are you allowed to answer that? Maybe you're not allowed to have favourites.
Oh, no, I can.
Oh, that's fine.
I can. It's a hard one. I think for me, possibly Skippinish with the 25th anniversary.
There's applause for that, Andy.
They're going to be...
Nice.
Yeah.
Say Skippinish more, you'll get more applause. That's the rule. Carol, thank you so much. Thank you for doing this. Thank you for being with us. Thank you. Right, good. Are you thinking of your questions? Are you feeling inspired? I wonder if you could think about whether the conversation is kind of, I don't know, is it improving your optimism for the future and what might be possible, or is it making you feel a bit deflated? And we'll get your thoughts towards the end, so have some, please. Right, for the next few minutes, we're going to spend some time with Alec MacLeod, Chief Executive of the Stornoway Port Authority. Alec, come on down. Half past. You're going to have to keep clapping, it's a long walk. Alec, thank you very much. Good to see you. And well, one of the main reasons, frankly, that we've got you here is because of the new deep water terminal, just across the way, 100 yards basically from where we are now. For cruise ships, there's a deep water dock for cargo vessels. Talk to us about the opportunity that this is bringing.
Huge opportunities. You're seeing some of them just in the last few weeks with cruise ships coming in. There's cruise ships coming in that we haven't been able to get into Stornoway before. I think last week we had 2 vessels in with 2,500 people in it. That brings a lot of money into our economy. Just looking around the audience tonight, there's at least half a dozen, probably more. There's tour guides, there's people who actually sell excursions to these ones. So there are people doing well out of the cruise industry, even in this room. So there's a huge amount of opportunities here. Currently, cruise is maybe the second largest element of our turnover. Renewables, quite low down just now. In the future, we want renewables to go there. So there's huge options here. So just now we concentrate on cruise. Going forward, we're very much looking at renewables.
Go on, Torko.
Yeah, when Alec walks on stage, that's when optimism walks into the room.
Right.
Because that port development, the Stornoway Harbour, one of the biggest natural harbours on the west coast, that big horseshoe. At one end of it, you have Harland and Wolff Yard, 145 jobs, kind of maybe a dozen apprentices. That's where Rosie the Riveter lives. You get female and male apprentices there. High quality jobs and a big order book as well for kind of a diverse range of projects. Next to that, you've got Ishka seaweed, a huge natural product. You can harvest and refine seaweed and sell it commercially all over the world. It kind of fertilizes lemons for the martinis in Florida, in Mar-a-Lago, no doubt.
Oh, wow.
And as a spin-off, they have like a fantastic cosmetics company that comes out of that. You come further in, you've got the cruise ship economy that's really transforming town. You know, the island is beginning to reshape itself to meet that demand, that cruise ship demand. And then you come around the other end of the harbour to Goat Island, where there's kind of electric boat building and a kind of scallop and prawn processing plant that Port Authority invested in. That is just going gangbusters,
yeah.
You know, like live scallops caught here, frozen in 7 seconds, served in Singapore in 24 hours. It's just incredible.
Put that on the poster, I'm sure.
It's just an incredible investment, incredible
stealing my thunder.
I was about to say, Alec, this is what
Sorry, Alex, steal your thunder.
No, just you was talking
it is impressive. What's happening is impressive.
Prawn factory. We invested in a prawn factory there 4 years ago. These prawns are going all over the world. There's about 20-odd countries. They're going to New Zealand, Australia. Our harbour master, his 2 sons are chefs in Michelin-starred restaurants, one in Singapore. Salesman came in, prawns from Stornoway. Brilliant.
Great.
You know, that's what we like to hear. So we've invested in that. As Torkel said, there's a company from Devon they're building electric workboats in Coat Island. That's a first in the UK, unusual for Stornoway, but these investments are actually working.
So this is optimism. So just before I come back to you, Alec, £33.7 million of funding from the Scottish Government went to the Deepwater project. So credit where it's due for the SNP on that one.
Yeah, well, we see your Deepwater project, Geoff, and we raise you.
We raise your prawns and your...
and of course, welcome investment,
Yeah.
fantastic investment, and it's already showing results. That's the thing. It's like, here's what we did, here's what we're doing, here's what we want to do.
And so, Alec, what my question, I suppose, to you is, do you find it easy? Are you kind of standing out from the crowd in the opportunities that you are seeing and chasing and pursuing and delivering for this place? Or is that happening all around you?
No, we're having to chase a lot of this. That's being honest. There's a lot of work out there, and we do have to chase it. There are a lot of opportunities. If we sit back and wait for it to come, it might not come.
Yeah.
We do need to be out there. We need to invest more in the future as well. How we do that, that's going to be a wee bit difficult going forward, but there's a huge amount of more opportunities out there.
I think and I don't want to return too much to the subject. I know we covered it in detail, but I touched on the 3 projects in your, let's say, immediate vicinity, not too immediate, but offshore. It's 4.8 gigawatts that's worth. Huge. And if we think that example I gave earlier on was 800 million for the Scottish economy, if you have your port in place to support whether it's assembly or O&M, that really could be the future of a lot of economic activity and opportunity for this country. But my question is for this constituency. My question is for Torkel on this, and it's something that we raised with Angus Macdonald last week. And there's a lot of ports just now over the Murray Firth, right down the northeast coast. Starting with Montrose. I know Alex, a friend of Tom Hutchison, Captain Tom Hutchison at Montrose. Massive expansion plan. Aberdeen's got that new harbour I talked about. Fraserburgh, Peterhead, all seeking and expanding to support offshore renewables. You've got Ardersier, Haventus in there with massive multi-million pound investments, Cromarty, Nig, and now we have this fabulous facility here in the Western Isles. And I suppose my question to you is this. There is central belt bias. There is centralisation, whether you're in Westminster or Holyrood. Would you join with an Angus MacDonald, a Kate Forbes, a Stephen Flynn, and say, do you know what, guys, we might disagree on politics, but on this is the future. This is the green industrialisation of our country. And we need to have port optimisation, so we know each port's doing, and we'll go all in on this.
Not just on that issue, Geoff, but on depopulation, on transport links, on ferry service. Now, there's no reason, and hopefully this will happen this week. There's no reason for all the Highland Islands MP to be in a cross-party group, and that's SNP in Argyll Bute and Liberal on the mainland and Liberal Orkney Shetland and Labour here.
So that'll happen this week?
I'm sorry, there's no reason why it shouldn't happen.
Oh, I see.
Why we couldn't get a group together.
But you're trying to initiate
There's common things like, air sea rescue services, depopulation, this green transformation. So much in common that party politics doesn't really kind of cut across it, but cross-party support and cooperation would. And I'd really like to push that idea of a cross-party Highlands and Islands grouping.
Like a caucus in America, the caucuses in America, the north of Scotland caucus, that's what I'm all about.
That's a theme that's come up in our podcast before, by the way, that real appetite for cross-party working in these sorts of areas.
I think there's a couple of things that spring to mind. It's great to, when I was here in Easter, there was a cruise ship out there with tenders going back and forth, and next time I come up I'll see it in the dock, I think, with buses going back and forth instead, and it's an obvious manifestation of the progress that's being made. It's good to see. It was actually from I did some work long ago on the island's growth deal, and it was part of the island's growth deal, actually a rare example of the Tory government at Westminster and the SNP government at Holyrood working quite well together during that island's growth deal. Actually, Michael Matheson and Alistair Jack had a good relationship, and they worked well, and a lot of money was leveraged for the three islands, much more per capita than was leveraged for any other growth deal on the mainland. And obviously the port was a big part of that pitch as well, so it's really good to see it happening. I think what we have to understand is that Scotland's not the only place building deep water ports. So we've got to keep going and do more of it. Geoff's right about ports around the country, and I know you know Captain Grains in Shetland, who we've been speaking to as well, building deep water port there to try to ensure that some of the decommissioning work and renewable work's being done there instead of Norway. Working together is really important in that, and it just has to keep accelerating and doing more. I think what's intriguing, though, and it comes back to something that Torkel said earlier on, actually, is about the caucus, yes, but also about Labour policy on mayors in particular, and on regionalisation. So, Scotland has become increasingly and incredibly centralised since devolution. Devolution has stopped in Edinburgh. Power was devolved to Holyrood from Westminster, and then power was sucked from local authorities to Holyrood at the same time. Largely, it has to be said by the SNP, I'm afraid. There was a lot of power taken from local authorities and given to Holyrood and to the Scottish
Can I
Government.
just say, I haven't worked for the SNP in 10 years. I get the blame for fecking everything around here.
But it was part of it was a good, strategically, politically sensible, because it created a kind of one Scotland approach and de-regionalised Scotland. Now, a lot of positive Labour soundings have been given to increase regionalisation again. I think the King's speech is going to include more regional powers for English mayors and English regions, which we don't have here, obviously. But Anas Sarwar has talked about mayoralties. I think he's talked more about metro mayors, so we're presuming he's thinking about Edinburgh, Dundee, Glasgow, Aberdein, maybe Inverness. But is there a case, and all the things we're talking about here, and ensuring that the islands have their voice, the Highlands have their voice, that different areas have their voice, do you think there's a case, and would you support, for instance, a mayor for the Western Isles? Not somebody competing with you or Alistair Allen or the council leader or anybody else, but somebody who spent their time largely in Edinburgh and London advocating for the Western Isles down in the central belt.
Because the Western Isles is a unitary authority, it has a council leadership as well. And I think you have to
a single elected mayor who was the Western Isles person in London and in Edinburgh. Is there a case for that in the way that there is for Manchester and London?
Hopefully I'll fill that vacancy for a little while. But I think the idea of having kind of regional devolution within Scotland in terms of dealing with housing, social housing in the Highlands, for example, having a Highland Housing Authority that has different spending powers, different regulations, different planning regulations from that might happen anywhere else. A Highland Transport Authority that makes sure the plane links with the bus and the bus links with the ferry. And all these things happen with more island representation on them. For example, the way Calum is run just now, with nary a person who's been to the islands on them, or the health board, the Western Isles Health Board, the same. I think there is a case for further devolution within Scotland, but that means that the authorities, the people that run it, have to be representative of the place they're running. That's not happening just now. And so I don't know whether the Western Isles itself should have a mayor, another layer of government, but certainly the Highlands needs a bigger voice, and what I spoke about there, which, forgive me, I haven't spoken to other Highland MPs about, but I certainly will, is just to have a one-stop shop where we can discuss and exchange our ideas and common experiences and present them to the rest of the world. I think that's a common sense idea. That's what people expect. People who aren't involved in politics look at politics and think, why don't these guys just get on with it and work together?
Alec, do you feel like that?
I never want to be in politics. Never. Never. If I do, there's something wrong.
He's the most political man I know.
Going back a wee bit further back, one of the things that, we're getting investment into the UK, getting investment into Scotland, is Scotland becoming a difficult place to invest in? It's, one of the things we as an industry look at is we do need to make it easier to invest in Scotland. And it's between consenting and a lot of other things like that, the investment will go elsewhere. The investments, your private equity firms and stuff like that, they will go where it's easier to invest where they can make most money. If we don't sort these things out, the investments will not come.
And so have you, I mean, I think that to most people, as Torkel says, to most people outside politics, people would see what you're doing over the water there as nothing but opportunity. It's not a cost for government, it's an opportunity. Do you feel like sometimes, whether it's Edinburgh or London, it's seen as being a cost more than it is being an opportunity? Do they get it, or are they not there?
With what we're doing, yes, they do see it as an opportunity, and we've got a good relationship with Scottish Government. We need to build a good relationship with UK Government going forward, because I think UK Government, if we're going to invest again, there's going to have to be some input from UK Government. But genuinely, with their projects, they did see it as an opportunity. That's 100%.
Really, really interesting. And optimism personified. Go on, very quickly, Torkel.
Very quickly, you talk about competition, cooperation. There's massive cooperation between the ports as well, as exemplified by Alex's beard, because he's going to be in the Jarl squad in Shetland, and port authorities.
Well, you've talked about it. Tom Hutchison and myself have been invited by Calum Grains in Shetland to join the Jarl squad. I'm not too sure my liver can handle it, but I'm willing to try.
Calum's beard is slightly further on than yours at this point, so you have a bit of catching up to do.
I've been trimming my beard.
When's the date?
It's next January.
Right, okay.
Next January.
So non-stop till then.
Yeah, so it's going to be a lot of
Let's do
beard
our
oil and things like
podcast
that.
there then, and see the beard progress.
Yeah. No, I'm going to keep mine relatively well trimmed compared to Calum's.
Alec, thank you very much. Really appreciate you joining us this evening. Alec MacLeod. Right, we've just a few minutes left of recording time, and so what we tend to do is sort of wave goodbye to the politicians at this point, and so we can have a bit of a debrief as well with you guys. So, Torkel, thank you. Thanks for spending time with us this evening. Amazing. I mean, you are welcome just to take your seat and listen in. You don't actually have to leave. But Torkel Crichton. Thank you. So yeah, this is a good point. Thoughts from you, questions from you, concerns from you. We've got somebody down the front here if you want to try and get a microphone. Andy, just quickly while we do that. Yeah. Optimism, are you feeling optimistic? Is there a sense of purpose here in the Western Isles? I mean, I think I've always been optimistic about what people here can do and what people here can achieve and what they can offer. The pessimism comes when I go back to Edinburgh. Right. To be honest with you. And I think I'm really interested in what Torkel said about almost flipping the map upside down. I mean, that is what's going to happen in Scotland over the next few decades. We used to have a situation where the Highlands and Islands felt dependent, they had their hands out all the time. They felt dependent on governments, whether it be in Edinburgh or in London. They felt they were always asking for something rather than offering something. And I would like to see the mentality of these places flip around in the way that the economy is about to flip around, because it may have been the case in the past that we were dependent here on the Central Belt. It might not be too far in the future. The Central Belt's more dependent on these places in remote and rural areas, in these islands, much more dependent, because we're the ones who are going to be producing the power in particular, but lots of other things as well. So I think we need to adjust our mentality and narrative in places like this up here and say, well, actually, you know what? We're not asking you for things anymore. We're telling you where the opportunities are, and you need to get on board. Yeah, really interesting. Let's come to you. Hello. Introduce yourself, if you would.
Don McSween, councillor at Cornwall and Shear and Crofter as well. So, Falchi going to hell in a year. I was disappointed, Calum, you didn't introduce in Gaelic as well. Well, that was very, very a missed opportunity.
I'm always shy. Yes. I don't want to be shunned.
Listen to the podcast, enjoy it every week. Sometimes you have more than one a week.
That's true.
But anyway,
when Geoff won't shut up.
One of the kind of vibes that I'm picking up tonight as well is, we're talking about our representatives making points to Scottish Government, private industry, Westminster. The reality, though, is you guys, 2-3 of you, have probably as much, if not more, influence than a lot of the elected representatives here. You've said yourselves in the information that you've sent out today, 80% of Scottish Parliament. You're looking quite smug now, Geoff. but 80% of Scottish parliamentarians listen to your podcast. Yeah. The drip feeding there is much more effective than the official banging on the door that we can do, and they don't listen to us. I do have a question. That's blowing smoke up your backside just now. one point you missed with Torquil is I didn't vote for Torquil because of Labour Party policies. I voted for him despite their stance on Scottish independence and Brexit. I voted for the man, nothing else. Anyway, my question is, what can we in the Western Isles, from your perspective, do to kind of ensure that our unique language, culture, way of life is not lost in search of progress? Because there's a risk there as well. And there's a report out this week where 21% of 16 to 75-year-olds in the Western Isles work on a croft or farm, which is higher than anywhere else in the country. We are connected to the land in a way that isn't reflected in other places. How do we ensure that we don't lose what is unique?
Interesting. Andy, do you want to go first? Geoff first?
I'll go first.
Yeah, go
That's a wonderful question. You said a lot there. Very kind of your compliments, first of all, the podcast, but actually, and I mean this, it's because we've been going to events like this, and we go around the country and we work with a lot of people. The reason I'm so passionate about energy is because I speak to energy supply chain companies, I speak to my family, my friends, my colleagues in there, and you learn what's important to them. And then we feed that back to the politicians that are on there. Let me say something to Torquil. I've known him for a number of years. I knew him when I started at Westminster, and he was the Westminster political editor, I believe, at the time for the Daily Record. You've got a good one here, okay? He's a very, very passionate guy. He sat there. I hope you don't mind me saying this, Torquil. I could see him welling up earlier on when he was answering how proud he was to represent you. You've got a good one here. Make sure he works for you as well. On the language piece, this is where I would come to the defence of the SNP, and particularly my former colleague Kate Forbes. I think she's very passionate about this particular aspect, and I think she'll continue to be passionate. But if we undertake the transformation that we hope this place undertakes, we can't let it become, sorry to use the phrase, Americanized, you know. It's got to be homegrown. And what I mean by that, I mentioned University of Highlands and Islands, and I think the primary schools and the secondary schools, if we're going to go on this green revolution, let's go on it together and never forget where you come from. I'm from a part of the country that still speaks Doric. Half my family speak Doric. My God, you wouldn't understand my mother. People say, you won't understand the folk from Western Isles. I was like, no, they wouldn't understand you, Mum. And that's important. That's part of our heritage. That's our fabric as a nation. We've got so many different dialects, histories to tell. That would be my pledge. That would be my plea, rather, to politicians, that if we're going to go undertake this transformation, make sure that our heritage, our culture, our identity is part of that transformation. That has to be a key part of the community benefit that Torquil talked about earlier.
Councillors and councils have much more power than they think. And part of the problem is that it isn't always used properly, in my view. I'll be completely blunt. In Edinburgh, in the Scottish Government, and to a degree at UK Government level as well, when the islands are mentioned, they roll their eyes because they think all you do is moan. Right? That's the reality. That's what it is seen as being. Here's another moan, here's another begging bowl. You need to change the mentality and flip it around. We're not in that era anymore. You've now got the power, literally, actually, in some cases. It's not about going and saying, you know, you don't understand us, you're shafting us. It's not about that anymore. It's about going and saying, here's what we have. We want you on board as partners, but here's what we've got. And this is what we want to do, and this is what we're going to do, and we want you to come with us on the journey. You have more power than you think you have. You just need to exercise it differently.
I think alongside that, there's something in Alec's mentality of taking great pride in the opportunities that are here and that are owned by this place. You're here tonight as a councillor. Sorry, but you are also a councillor. And I will tell you that I emailed every single person that is a councillor on this island to come along tonight. I didn't hear back from any of them directly, I don't think. And there's maybe 2 or 3 in the room tonight. I'm sorry if I've miscounted. And it's just you. And that actually really upset me, because I think this sort of thing is a huge opportunity to come together, to speak to Torquil, who's a real advocate and representative for this place, to speak to one another, and I was a bit annoyed about that. Maybe it's a timing thing, maybe it's summer holidays and people are away, I get that, that's okay. But I just think there has to be a great pride in what this place has to offer and to engage with ways to present that to people. And I think that comes to the language question, the culture question as well. Because there's a huge individual pride in these things. Shout about it. Be a part of the conversation and don't hide away from it. And that's the way that these things grow and develop and survive, frankly. Thanks. Right, we are...
I mean, the first clap comes for the feckin' host. Unbelievable.
Some people have got it, Geoff, and some people
Actually,
don't.
one person clapped for the A9 toll, so...
That's true. Andy, whoever that was, by the way, if you could make yourself known to Andy afterwards, because he's looking...
I'll collect your £15 in the absence of an apology.
That person's drunker than me.
Right, we're a few minutes over time, but I don't want to cut... If anybody would like to add anything by way of debrief or question or comment, just on our way out the door, you're very welcome to do that. And if not, it's a warm room. You might want to go home, and that's okay too. We all good? Everybody happy? Are you feeling optimistic? It's an audio production. Good. That's good. That's good. And make sure you badger Torkel on his way out. Could we show some appreciation for the wisdom and insight of Geoff and Andy, please? Thank you very much. This podcast would absolutely be nothing without them, so we're very grateful that they've made the trip, that they're here, and that they actually are big advocates for this place as well, and don't forget that. Thank you all very much for coming. Getting 100 people in a room on a Monday night to have this sort of conversation is no mean thing, so no mean feat. So thank you very much for making the effort. We really, really appreciate it. Make sure you follow the podcast, subscribe to the podcast, wherever you want to listen to it. Please feel free, and keep in touch. You can email us anytime. hello@holyroodsources.com is the email address. Thank you. I hope this has been helpful. I hope you've enjoyed it, and we'll speak to you soon. Thanks very much.